Alright, so I have to finish these. Okay. Uh, I'll get a quick reminder. Let's do a quick revision and then we can move on. Right. Okay, there you go. Alright, so floating element moves it to left or right and allows the following text to wrap around it, and positioning is the way to specify the location of an element anywhere on the page. Okay, normal flow. So we've covered the normal flow, but with floating, simple float property moves an element as far as possible to the left or right, allowing the following content to wrap around it. It is not positioning scheme per se, but a unique built-in feature into CSS with interesting behaviors. Floats are one of the primary. Okay, we go. A float element is like an element in the stream. Okay, float stays in content area of the element. Okay. Okay, so floating inline margins and maintain. In addition, margins are held on all sides of the floated image as indicated here. Okay, so stays on the content area of the containing element. Okay, we says it's possible to float any HTML element inline block level. So always provide a width for floated text elements, and then floated inline element behave as block element. Okay, margins on floated elements do not collapse. Okay, in the normal flow, updating top and bottom margins collapse, overlap, but not here. Okay, so you must provide a width for floated block elements, and then elements do not float higher than their reference in the source. Okay. Clearing float elements. So we can, if you're going to be floating elements around, it is important to know how to turn the text wrapping off and get back to the layout as usual. This is by clearing the element you want. Start below the float element. Keep in mind that you apply clear property to the element you want to start below the floated element. Left value keeps to left and right value keeps them to the right. Okay. Notice although the 2em top margin applied to the issue element, it is not rendered between the heading and the floated image. That's the result of collapsing vertical margins in the flow. If you want to make sure space is held between the following text, apply a bottom margin to the floated element itself. Okay. Then we are floating multiple elements. When you float multiple elements, there is a complex system of behind the scenes rendering rule that ensures floated elements do not overlap. You can consult CSS specification for details, but the upshot of is that floated element will be placed as far left or right possible, as high and as high up as space allows. Okay, so that's the underlying behavior. Let's apply some more practical navigation menu sense. Okay, so we this type and we float it to null, and we set that this display level is block element. Okay, we are displaying as block element containing floats. Okay, for instance, double clearly to recognize border, slash the content of the floated element here triangle around the container div. So left container has a background color and says this is clearly not the behavior. Fortunately, there are a few fixes. We give it a width of 100%. Okay. And overflow property. The other common solution is to take advantage of the behavior of the overflow property. Okay, we set overflow to auto. Alright. Alright. So we set we float it to the left, and then we clear the beneath products, and then we have with is 100%, overflow is hidden. Okay, we can using floats to create columns. Two columns. Okay, positioning static relative. Okay, I know positioning part, the index part containing block. So let's attempt test yourself. Okay. So before we move on, take a moment to see how well you absorbed the principles in this chapter. Which of the following is not true of the floated element? True for the position against the padding edge of the containing uh, padding edge. Yeah, true. The content of the inline element flows around the float, but the element box is unchanged. Okay, you must provide a for floated block elements. The content of inline elements flow around a float, but the element box is unchanged. Then I think this is not true. So this is 388, 97, chapter 15. B, yeah, floater position against the content edge, not the padding edge. Right. Hold up, hold up. What is the current? 3. Okay, 593. Okay, float. Okay. So I'll go with they are positioned against the content edge, not the padding edge. We have which of these style rules is incorrect. So float left margin, float right. Why? We float right, then right 30 pixels. Okay, float right we provide a width and a height. Right, yeah, this is incorrect. I'll go need to specify position type for using right attribute. Okay, so I'll quickly jump to 523. See, yeah, floats do not use offset properties, so there is no reason to include right. Okay. Right. Also, floats do not use offset properties. Okay. How do you make sure a footer div starts below a floated sidebar? Clear it to the left, right? Clear the foot to make sure it start below, right? Clear both, right. Clear both. 388. Okay. Clear it from the both sides to center it. Okay. Write the name of the positioning method or methods, static, relative, absolute, that best matches each of the following. Okay, so I'll go. This is S, R, A, and F. Okay. So I'll go position the element relative to the containing block. So this is relative to the containing block, and absolute also position it relative to the containing block. It's relative and absolute. It removes the element from the flow. So relative moves the element from the flow, removes the element from the, oh no, yeah, well, it does remove the element from the normal flow. Always position the element relative to the viewport. So fixed positioned element may overlap other content. Relative and absolute can overlap other content. positions the element in the normal flow. This is static. Okay, the space the element have occupied in the normal flow is preserved. Relative. So we'll quickly check up our answers. Okay. Absolute, absolute fixed. Oh right. Okay. 388. We go absolute. Okay. Relative is not containing block. Right. Okay. So remove the element from the normal flow. Okay. So it does not remove the element from the normal flow. Okay. Absolute, absolute is fixed. Then we have fixed only. C fixed. C is fixed, right? Then we have position element may overlap other content. So R A relative and absolute, and it says relative absolute fixed. Okay, relative absolute fixed can also overlap, right? Okay, correct. So relative absolute fixed can also overlap. Oh, there were more. Okay, the space occupied in the normal relative. The space the element would have occupied in the normal flow is closed up, so that would be absolute and fixed. You can change the stacking order with z index. Z index I can change when there is overlapping, so I can change it in any, right? Z index is applicable on any of the SRAF. Okay. Position the element relative to its original position in the normal flow. Positions the element relative to its original position in the, I think that's relative. Okay, so static relative occupied in the normal flow. So 523. I have static relative, then absolute fixed, then relative absolute fixed. Okay, so we have absolute and then fixed. Okay, hold up. Right, relative then absolute fixed. Okay, so static we can't do with. Static is relative absolute fixed, and then I think last one is relative only. This one is relative only, right? Good, 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 good. Okay. So we return here. And I have CSS review float, move the element to the right or left, and allows the following text view. Flow around clear prevents an element from being laid out next to a float. Position specifies the position method to be applied to the element. Okay, specifies the offset amount for each respective edge. The index specifies the order appearance with stack overlapping positioned elements. Okay, then we move on to page layout with CSS. Okay. Now that you understand the principles of moving elements around on the page using CSS floats and positioning, we can put these tools to use in some standard page layouts. This template looks at the various approaches to CSS-driven web design and provides some simple templates that will get you on your way to building basic 2 and 3 column web pages. Okay. Before we get started, it must be said. Okay, before we get started, it must be said that there are seemingly endless variants on creating multi-column layouts in CSS. This step is intended to be a starter kit. The templates presented here are simplified and may not work for every situation, although I've tried to point out the relevant shortcomings to each. Okay. We have page layout strategies. Before we start dissecting CSS layouts, let's talk about the various options for structuring a web page. As you know, web pages appear on browsers of all sizes, from tiny phone screen to cinema displays. In addition, users can resize their text, which has an impact on the layout of the page. Over time, several standard page layout approaches have emerged that that address these issues in various ways. Okay, so we have fixed layout. fixed layouts Fixed layouts stay put at okay, so we have fixed layouts stay put at specific fixed layouts stay put at a specific pixel width regardless of the size of the browser window or text size. Fluid or liquid layouts resize proportionally when the browser window resizes. Elastic layouts resize proportionally based on the size of the text, and hybrid layout combines fixed and scalable areas. Okay. So let's examine how each strategy works as well as the reason for and against using each of them. Okay, so we have fixed layouts. Fixed layouts, as the name implies, are created at a name. Okay. Fixed layouts, as the name implies, are created at a specific pixel width as determined by the designer. Akin to print, they allow the designer to control the relationship of page elements, alignment, and line length. Okay. So optimal line length. Line length is a measure of the number of words or characters in a line of text. The rule of thumb is that the optimal line length is 10 to 12 words or between 60 to 75 characters. Okay. When line length grows too long, the text becomes more difficult to read. Not only is it hard to focus long enough to get to the end of a long line, it is also okay, it also requires extra effort to find the beginning of the next. Right. Line length is at the heart of the debate over which layout technique is superior. In fluid layouts, a line length might get too long when the browser is sized very wide. In fixed width designs, the line lengths may become awkwardly short if the text is sized large with a narrow and rigid column width. The elastic layout introduced later in the chapter, however, offers predictable line lengths even when the text is sized larger. This makes it a popular option for balancing design and accessibility priorities. Okay, so we have fixed layouts, as the name implies, are created. Right, okay. This layout approach became popular due to the fact that folk have traditionally viewed the web primarily on desktop monitors with ample real estate, and web designers were keen on reproducing designs that looked exactly the same on every screen. But as we know, times are changing, and we no longer make those assumptions or strive for pixel perfection. When you design a page to be specific with, you need to decide a couple of things. First, you need to pick the width, usually based on common monitor resolutions. As of this writing, most sites are designed to be 960 pixels wide or thereabout to fit nicely in the most common 1024 by 768 monitor resolution. Some designers keep their layout narrower, some venture even larger as monitor resolution increases. Either way, it is a design decision. You also need to decide where the fixed width layout should be positioned in the browser window. By default, it stays on the left edge of the browser with extra space to the right of it. Okay. So you also need to decide where the fixed width layout should be positioned in the browser window. By default, it stays on the left edge of the browser with an extra space to the right of it. You can also center the page, splitting the extra space over left and right margins, which may make the page look as though it better serves the browser window. To fix out, okay. One of the main concerns. Alright, so we pad it some from the left, and then we pad it from the right. Okay. So one of the main concerns with using fixed layout is that if the user's browser window is not as wide as the page, the content on the right of the edge will be hidden. Although it is possible to scroll horizontally, it may not always be clear that there is more content there in the first place. In addition, although the structure of the page doesn't change, if a user has text set to a very large size to make it easier to read, there may be very few words on a line, and the layout may look awkward or break altogether. Okay. Let's review the pros and cons of fixed width strategy. Advantages: the layout is predictable and offers better control over line length. It is easier to design and produce. It behaves the way the majority of web pages behave as of this writing, but that may change as users but that may change as users visit the web primarily on devices other than the desktop. Okay, so we have disadvantages. Content on the right will be hidden if the browser window is smaller than the page. There may be an awkward amount of leftover space on large screens. Line length line lengths may grow awkwardly short at very large text sizes. Takes control away from the user. Let's see here. Grid framework. Okay. We have CSS grid framework. Designers have been using grids for alignment and content organization since the early days of graphic design. And grid systems have become a useful tool for web designers as well. A grid is an invisible foundation that divides a page into equal units. Okay. A grid is an invisible foundation that divides the page into equal units that can be used to determine where columns, headlines, images, and so on should fall. Sticking to grid units only ensures that your content will be proportional, but it can make design decisions go more quickly. Okay, not only ensures. Many CSS grid frameworks, think of them as kits, have emerged to help streamline the design and develop process. Perhaps most well known is the 960 grid system, which divides which divides 960 pixel wide page into either 12 or 16 column units. Blueprint and Bluetap are based on similar fixed width grids. For a fluid 2 or 3 column grid, there is from Yahoo. Okay, with emergence of mobile, we are beginning to see responsive grid hit the scene, including the 1140 CSS grid, Skeleton, and Bootstrap from Twitter. Right, Bootstrap. Of course, this is just a snapshot of the CSS framework scene as of this writing, and this list barely scratches the surface. By all means, do a web search. To find the latest and greatest. Using a framework requires solid HTML and CSS chops, but once you get up to speed, they may save you time. The downside is that the code tends to be more bloated than if it were handcrafted, and you may be forcing unnecessary data to download. For this reason, some designers use framework to speed up the design process but create custom code for the If you're interested in learning more about grid systems, we have fluid page design. In fluid page layouts, also called liquid layouts, the page area and columns within the page get wider or narrower to fill the available space in browser window. In other words, they follow the default behavior of the normal flow. There is no attempt to control the width of the content or line breaks. The text is permitted to reflow as required and is natural to the medium. Again, which is a good example of a liquid layout. Okay. Fluid layouts are a cornerstone of the responsive web design technique. Now that web designers are coming to terms with the vast variety of browsers, windows, and screen sizes, particularly those particularly those smaller than traditional desktop monitor, many are moving to design that flex to fill the browser width, whatever that might be. Because it is futile to try to build a fixed width design for every screen size, I think fluid layouts will see a resurgence. So we have first, fluid layouts have both advantages and disadvantages. Fluid layouts keep with the spirit and nature of the medium. They avoid potentially awkward empty space because the text fills the window. On desktop browsers, users can control the width of the window and content, no horizontal scroll bars. Disadvantages: on large monitors, line lengths can get very long and uncomfortable to read. They are less predictable. Elements may be too spread out or too cramped at extreme browser dimensions. It may be more difficult to achieve white space, and there is more math involved in calculating measurements. Okay. So, how to create fluid layouts? Create a fluid layout by specifying width in percentage value. You may also simply omit the width attribute in case the width will be set to default auto. Setting and element will fill the available width of the window or containing elements. We create a liquid layout by specifying width in percentages. In in this two column layout, the width of each div has been specified as a percentage of the available page width. The main column will always be 70% of the width of the window, and the right column fills 25%. The 5% is used for the margin between the columns, regardless of the window size. You've already gotten a taste for this approach when you created a column with a float here. Okay. One potential drawback to fluid layouts is overly long line lengths, but you can prevent the layout from becoming ridiculously wide by specifying a maximum width for the page. So min width and max width are not supported. Okay. You can also use min width to keep the page from getting crazy skinny. That gives you some of the advantages of the fixed layout. That gives you some of the advantages of a fixed layout while providing flexibility at sizes in between. Okay. Just a second. Alright, then we have this thing. We have elastic layout. A third layout approach marries a resizable text with predictable line lengths. Elastic layout expand or contract with the size of the text. If if the user makes the if the user makes the text larger, the box that contains it expands proportionally. Likewise, if the user likes the text very small, the containing box shrinks to fit. The result is that the line length, in terms of words or character per line, stays the same regardless of the text size. This is an advantage over liquid layouts with a line length can get too long, and fixed layouts where very large text may result in awkwardly few characters per line. Alright, so figure shows the uh, elastic lawn designed by Patrick Griffiths at CSS and Garden, an oldie but goodie for showing elastic layout at work. Notice that when the text size gets bigger in each sample, so does the current area of the content page. However, instead of rewrapping in larger layout space, the line breaks are the same. Okay, the creator of Elastic Lawn wrote about elastic layouts in Elastic Design article at a list part. It's getting on in years, but still provides good detail on his method. Maybe I'll check it out if this site still works. Alright, let's try this. Huh. 2004, bro. Okay. Then we have, right. Okay, the full page zoom feature offered by most current browsers has stolen some of the Elastic Design's thunder. Now, all web page appears to scale up proportionally, but Elastic layouts can still address issues caused by users making changes to their default browser font size. Okay. Proponents of elastic design like that the proportions of the page are tied to the typographic content. In these days of unknown screen dimensions, it makes sense to design with our content elements as the code. However, elastic layouts have the same issues as fixed width layouts at large sizes. Although you can control that with max priority and are generally not as useful as fluid layouts in the mobile context. Okay. Another drawback is that although the page grid scales with the text, embedded media such as images and movies do not. There are solutions to that as well, but those are beyond the scope of this chapter. It's time to review the pros and cons. Advantages: provides a consistent layout experience while allowing flexibility in text size. Tighter control over line length, red liquid, and fixed layouts. Okay. Disadvantages: images and videos don't lend themselves to automatic rescaling along with the text and the rest of the layout, but there are methods to achieve this. The width of the layout might exceed the width of the browser window at large text sizes, not as useful for addressing devices and browser size variety. More complicated to create than fixed width layout. How to create elastic layouts. Okay, so how to create elastic layouts. The key to elastic layout is the EM, the unit of measurement that is based on the size of the text. For example, an element with 16 pixel text and EM is 16 pixels. Right. It is common to specify font size in EMs. In elastic layouts, in elastic layout, the dimensions of the containing elements are specified in EMs as well. That is how the width can respond to the text size. For example, if the body text size is set to 16 pixels, the default size on most browsers and the page is set to 40 EM. The page is set to 40 EM. The resulting page width would be 640 pixels, 40 EM into 16. If the user resizes to 20, the page grows to 800 pixels. Okay. hybrid layouts. Layouts that use a combination of pixel percentage and EM measurements are sometimes called hybrid layouts. In many scenarios, it makes sense to mix in many scenarios, it makes sense to mix fixed and scalable content areas. For example, you might have a sidebar that contains a stack of ad banners that must stay a particular size, and you could specify you could specify that sidebar at a particular pixel width and allow the column next to it to resize to fill the remaining space. You may remember that we created a page like that in 15.4. Right. For example, okay, 15 figure 16.6 illustrates a hybrid layout. Okay, this is the hybrid layout. 200 pixel resize to fill the resizers. Ah, okay. Okay, 16.6 illustrates a hybrid layout. The secondary column on the left is set to a specific pixel width, and the main content is set to auto and fills the remaining space in the window. A word of warning. Okay, a word of warning. When you mix length, it becomes much more complicated to calculate page and element width, but it's possible if there is a good reason to do so. Right, which one should I use? As you can see, each layout approach has its own advantages and drawbacks. And as layout trends come and go, we're seeing a shift from fixed desktop appropriate sites to fluid designs that are better suited to work well across all devices. You may find that a fluid layout works best for smaller screen sizes in a responsive site, but a fixed layout gives you control. Okay. Want when the page is viewed on very large monitors, or perhaps your site is a complex intranet application that requires a fixed design and is likely to be used only on a desktop browser. So there is no right way, and it is important that you be familiar with all the options to make the best decisions for your site or applications based on its content, purpose and primary use. Okay, then we have page layout techniques. Here it is, the section you've been waiting for. Okay, how many things are here? Page layout oh, okay, so I'm starting here. Alright. Page layout techniques. Here it is, the section you've been waiting for. How to create 2 and 3 column layouts using CSS. The example in this section should give you a good head start towards understanding how layout works. But they are not universal solutions. Your content may dictate more complicated approaches. This section provides template and techniques for the following: 2 and 3 column layout using floats, a source independent layout using float and negative margins, a multi-column layout using positioning. Okay. The HTML and CSS, all of the templates in this section are available in here. Okay. Using the examples. The sample pages in this section aren't pretty. In fact, I've stripped them down from their bare minimum to help make the structure and strategy as clear as possible. Here are a few notes regarding the templates and how to use them. Simplified markup and styles. Is there something? Using floats. Do we have any exercises? No. Okay, using the examples, the simple pages in the sections aren't pretty. In fact, I've stripped them down to their bare minimum to help make the structure and strategy as clear as possible. Here are a few notes regarding the templates and how to use them. Simplified markup and styles. I've included only the bare minimum markup and styles in the examples, just enough to follow how each layout is created. All style rules not related to the layout have been omitted to save space and to focus on what is needed to move elements around. Color coding. I've added outlines. Outline in the example in the section, I've taken the advantage of the outline property to reveal the edges of the floated and positioned elements. Outlines look like borders and the syntax is the same, but there is an important difference. Outlines, unlike borders, are not calculated in the width of the element box, they just lay on top, not interfering with anything. This makes outline a great tool for checking your layout work because you can turn them on and off without worrying about measurement. So outline shorthand property combines value for outline width, outline style and outline color properties, just like border. Okay. Varied outline, see the around each column, so you can see the edges of the floated or positioned elements in the layout. The outlines are color coded with a markup and the styles that create them in an effort to make the connections more clear. Headers and footers. I've included a header and a footer on many of these examples, but either one or both could easily be omitted for a minimal 2 or 3 column page layout. Make it yours. There is obviously a lot more that could be done with text, backgrounds, margins, padding, and borders to make these pages more appealing. Once you've laid a framework with these templates, you should feel free to change the measurements and add your own styles. Okay. Multi-column layouts using floats. This was page layouting. Okay, so this is the first one. Okay, floats are the primary tool for creating columns. Okay, so these are the 3 main techniques. Floats are the primary tool for creating columns on web pages. As a tool, it is flawed, but it's the best that we've got as of this writing. You see the sidebar, the future of CSS layout for more sophisticated solutions that are just on the horizon. Okay. The advantages that float have over absolute positioning for layout are that they prevent content from overlapping other content and they make it easier to keep footer content at the bottom of the page. The drawback is that they are dependent on the order in which the element appear in the source. Although there is a workaround using negative margins, as we'll see later in the section. The following examples reveal the general strategy for approaching 3 column layouts using floats and should serve as a good head start towards implementing your own layouts. Okay, so the future of CSS layout. Cascading style sheets are constantly evolving to meet the needs of designers and developers, and there are some new layout techniques in the works that may free us from hacking together columns with floats and positioned columns. The most straightforward layout improvement that is already being implemented in browsers is the ability to divide an element into honest to goodness columns. Thanks heavens, you can specify a number of column count or a specific column width that will repeat until it runs out of room, column width, and there's a lot more to it, of course, which you can read yourself, the multi-column. Okay. CSS columns are currently supported in Safari and Chrome with the WebKit prefix, Firefox with the Moz prefix, and Opera 8N with no prefix. Okay. Okay, Flexbox. The CSS flexible box layout model, known as Flexbox for short, provides a much simpler way to arrange element boxes in relation to one another. For example, you can line children elements up within a parent, select where extra space appears, center things horizontally or vertically, and even change the order of appearance. All without resorting to floats and margin offsets and the tricky calculations that come with them. With Flexbox, you can basically just say make this a box and center its styled element horizontally and vertically within it. There's too much to spec to even debate in here, but I recommend Stephen Hayes' introductory article as well as recommendation itself. Flexbox is currently supported on very latest browser versions with vendor prefixes. Okay. Grid layout system. Microsoft has begun implementing a collection of CSS properties that allow you to establish a grid of rows and columns for each element and then position other elements along that grid. Then it is very then it is very then it is this is in its very early stages as of this writing, but it is worth keeping an eye on. Read more about it at the W3C and the Microsoft Developer Network. Okay, regions and exclusions. Adobe, the company that brings you Photoshop and other designery product, is making contributions to the CSS canon in the form of layout modules that duplicates some of the functionality of its page layout products. CSS regions allow content to flow from one element to another, similar to the way text flows from text box to text box in InDesign. Okay, CSS exclusions are a method for making text wrap around an irregular shape, such as you'd see in a magazine layout. You can read more about the development of these cutting edge features at the W3 as well as at the HTML. Okay, right, so I have two column fluid layout. I think I will continue it next time around. Right, where am I? Multi-column layout, two column layout and two column with fixed width. Maybe I can cover one. Okay, two columns fluid layout. In exercise 15.3 in the previous chapter, we created a 2 km layout by floating one element and using a margin on the second to make room for that. In the following example, we float all the element to one side. You can float columns to the left or right depending on the source order in your document and where you want. Okay. The strategy: set widths on both column elements and float them to the left. Clear the footer to keep it at the bottom of the page, and the underlying structure and resulting layout is shown. Okay, so we have div, header, main article, must. Okay. Then we have the styles and floated to the left with 60%, 25%, and it is clear to the left. Okay. Any extras? Okay. Main. This is ID header. Okay. This one is pretty straightforward. Okay, what it looks like. This is the source order, and this is the layout order. Okay, so we don't touch. Okay, the header, we just go with main and extras. Okay, this one is pretty straightforward, but because this is our first one, I'll point a few things out. Remember that I've omitted the header, footer and text styles to keep the examples as simple as possible. Keep in mind that there is a bit more at work in here than what is listed under the styles. Nothing you couldn't figure out though: background colors, padding, stuff like that. Okay. Then the source document has been divided into 4 divs, one for each header. Each of the header, main content, extras, and the markup shows the order in which they appear. Okay. This and this. Okay. Both main and extras have been floated to left because they are floats width are specified for each. You can make your columns as wide as you like. Okay. The main element has a 5% margin applied to the left and right sides. Okay, left and right. Okay. The extras element only needs margin on the right. Okay. The margins on the top have been set to 0, so they vertically align. Alright. You will also float one column to the left and the other to the right for the same effect. The footer is cleared, so it starts below the intent. Right. Then we have say enough is enough with max width. Fluid layouts are great because they can adapt themselves to the screen or browser window size on which they are displayed. We spend a lot of time considering how our pages fit in small spaces, but don't forget that at the other end of the spectrum are high resolution monitors approaching or exceeding 2000 pixels in width. Users Users may not maximize their browser windows to fill the whole screen, but there is a potential for the browser window to be so wide that the text in your flexible columns become difficult to read. You can put a stop to the badness with max width property. Okay. Apply it to the column main. Okay. Similarly, min width. So I said that is it for today.